This unit logically follows from our discussion regarding relationship initiation and development and focuses on maintaining relationships, or what we call relationship maintenance. So these are behaviors that promote relationship satisfaction and longevity. If you think about just the word maintenance, right, we perform maintenance on things that we care about to ensure that they remain in good condition, right? So we perform maintenance on our cars, on our houses and our yards, and on our bodies. So it makes sense that we would perform maintenance on our relationships as well, because they are just as important as those other things that we value. Relationship maintenance is a little bit difficult to define because it's not just one specific thing. It actually reflects four important actions or behaviors. So, relationship maintenance involves actions that prevent the end of a relationship, or, otherwise actions that maintain the existence of a relationship. So, for example, we have to stay in contact with one another um, to maintain a relationship. You can't just disappear on somebody and expect that relationship to still be in existence. But some relationships require more regular, extensive contact than others, in addition to physical closeness. So, for example, you can keep up with your friends and your acquaintances on social media, but you may find it more important to call your best friend with big news, call them on their birthday, right? Or for example, I text regularly with my best friend because um, we live in two different states and we really only see each other around Christmas time. Um, so the way we maintain our relationship is by regularly communicating via text message, but I'll make a point of sending her a gift on her birthday or calling her if I have something like really big or important or exciting to share. Relationship maintenance also involves maintaining the status quo. So, this is keeping the relationship in a preferred state or at a preferred level of intimacy. So, in other words, you keep your friendship close despite physical distance or geographic distance. Um, but you also might keep a friendship from developing into a romantic relationship, right? So in some cases, we engage in relationship maintenance behaviors to prevent commitment or additional commitment, or to prevent increasing intimacy. And we'll talk about some examples of that here in a few minutes. Relationship maintenance also involves negotiating satisfaction. So these are things that you do to keep yourself and the other person happy and invested in the relationship. So you might take a special trip with your friends, for example, or maybe you want to make sure you're kind of keeping the spark alive in your romantic relationship. So you plan a really romantic dinner or outing for the two of you. And then finally, relationship maintenance involves doing repair work in the relationship. So this is not only preventing problems as they occur, but also correcting problems as they occur. So it's ideal to keep problems from arising in the first place, but sometimes it happens, and you just have to be mindful of that and engage in the appropriate steps to correct those issues. Now, all four of these overlap with one another, so it's not like um, you're focusing on just one type of relationship maintenance necessarily in different relationships, right? So in other words, to keep a relationship satisfying, you probably need to prevent the problems that you can and correct the problems that arise, and in doing so, that keeps the relationship in existence or prevents it from ending. So overall, relationship maintenance really involves keeping the relationship at a desired level. There are three primary principles of relationship maintenance. The first one is that we use a variety of both strategic and routine maintenance behaviors. So, strategic maintenance behaviors are intentionally designed and implemented to maintain the relationship, whereas routine behaviors are less strategic and less deliberate. So, for example, I call my dad every Sunday. We used to just do a phone call, but now that I have a child, he wants to physically see her because, again, we're separated by geography. So every Sunday, we have a phone call with him and my stepmom. Um, when you, let's say you get in a big fight with one of your friends and you call that friend to apologize, many of you maybe send flowers to your moms on Mother's Day, right? So all of these are strategic behaviors because you're doing them intentionally and deliberately to maintain that relationship. Routine behaviors are just everyday things you do without the express purpose of maintaining the relationship. So things like sharing tasks, for example, household chores with your roommate, right? That's just a routine way of that you're going to do the chores anyway, but it also helps to maintain the relationship. Communicating positivity to the other person, right? So showing you're happy when they come home, for example, or showing that you're happy just to be hanging out with them and to be talking with them. So, routine behaviors, the research has suggested, are more important and linked to relationship satisfaction and commitment. But it's important to note that behaviors that are routine in one situation might be strategic in a different situation, right? So, holding hands in public with a romantic partner is a pretty routine behavior. But if that person is experiencing stress or if the two of you are in a conflict with one another, you might strategically reach for their hand or engage in some type of physical touch, right, to let them know that you're there. And that would be a more strategic action. So that's principle number one. The second principle is that people in relationships characterized by high levels of pro social maintenance stay together longer and are more satisfied with their relationships. Um, and in here in just 1 second, like right on the next slide, we're going to talk about the difference between pro social maintenance behaviors and antisocial maintenance behaviors. And then finally, different types of relationships require different types of maintenance. So, toward the end of this presentation, we're going to talk about different types of relationships and the different ways in which we maintain them because they do require different types of behaviors. This is an example that comes up in various forms on my social media, so I thought I would share it. So it's both about making coffee. Both examples are about making coffee for your partner. But the one on the left says, "My husband makes the coffee every morning. It is a small, simple gesture that shows me he cares. Last week he was in a rush and forgot to make it. I received a text apologizing, and I hadn't even realized how much it meant to both of us. 30 minutes later, a Starbucks was delivered to my work. Either he loves me so much or he knows how I act without caffeine. I think maybe both." So, what's interesting, I think, about this example is that she starts off by describing or just a routine maintenance behavior. And this is something that if my husband on the days that he goes to work and I'm home with our daughter, I'll go into the kitchen and I'll find that the Keurig is prepared and ready for me to just basically push the button and make my coffee. So I relate to this example. So this is just sort of a routine, everyday thing that she's describing in the beginning of this post. But then she says, last week he was in a rush and he forgot to do this. So he apologized and then, had Starbucks delivered to her. That kind of pushed the behavior into strategic territory, right? So I really like that example. And then over on the right, even when we're in a huge fight and barely speaking to one another, my husband will still bring me my first cup of coffee in the morning just the way I like it. Those little gestures have saved our marriage just as much as the big ones, in my opinion. And so this person is also describing those kind of everyday routine things that maybe you don't think too much about, but are actually really important gestures in communicating to the other person that you love them, that you like them, that you appreciate them, right? Just showing that you care about them and the relationship. Okay, so moving on to pro-social maintenance strategies, and then we'll talk about anti-social maintenance strategies as well. Pro-social strategies are positive behaviors that promote relational closeness, trust, and liking. So these are the kind of 5 primary pro-social strategies that come up regularly in the research or have regularly been identified in the research. So positivity is generally just making interactions pleasant and enjoyable. So being upbeat and cheerful. Issuing compliments is an example of a positive behavior. Openness is directly discussing the relationship and engaging in self disclosure. So, this includes things like routine talk, talking and listening to one another. So, more specifically, self disclosure, sharing secrets, asking someone how their day is, following up with someone about something, right? So, if you know, for example, that your friend just went to a doctor's appointment and maybe your friend was very nervous about that doctor's appointment, and then you send her a text or you call her just to check in and see how that doctor's appointment went. Offering assurances is another strategy. So, this is underscoring commitment and assuring the partner of the future of the relationship as well as communicating support. So, assuring them that you care about them and about the relationship. And it might include things like talking about the future. Social networks. This is involving your friends, both parties, friends and families, in relationship activities. So, spending time with each other's friends and family. One of the things that I don't know that if my husband, enjoys it or appreciates it every year anyway. But my family goes on a family vacation every summer, so he has participated in those vacations for the last several years, and they can be quite stressful, right? So it's not necessarily something that he probably wants to do, but he does it to maintain the relationship, right? And this also includes things like accepting each other's friends. And I'm sure we can think of examples where sometimes partners don't, like or appreciate or even express that they don't like or appreciate the other person's friends or family members. And then finally, sharing tasks would be performing routine tasks or chores that are relevant to the relationship and performing them together, or at the very least, sharing them, right? So, household chores, any important financial decisions, you make those decisions together. Family planning might be a specific task that you have to work together, right, to find a point at which you are on the same page. So research has shown that couples who regularly use these 5 behaviors tend to have relationships characterized by high levels of satisfaction, commitment, liking, and love. And satisfaction just generally reflects the pleasure or the enjoyment that people derive from their relationships. There are, however, additional pro-social maintenance strategies that help to increase commitment and love and liking and all that. So engaging in supportiveness or communicating supportiveness, right? So making sacrifices for your partner, showing support and encouragement, providing comfort for them, and so on. Engaging in joint activities and spending time together. So this could just be hanging out, or this could be doing some kind of specific activity like going hiking or playing sports or something like that. Showing romance and affection, right? So revealing your positive and caring feelings for the other person. So saying things like, I love you, planning a romantic date, and just engaging in or showing nonverbal signs of romance and affection. Sharing inside jokes, engaging in humorous communication, right? Being sarcastic with one another, laughing together. These are all important ways of communicating positivity in a relationship. Being able to manage conflict constructively is important as well. So, in a way that promotes problem solving and harmony. So, listening to each other's arguments and trying to come up with solutions that address each other's side rather than shutting down the other person is important. And then maintaining monogamy, right? So, avoiding any attractive alternatives also helps to bolster the relationship. So, all of these promote stability and commitment to the relationship as well as relationship satisfaction. In addition to pro social maintenance behaviors, we do sometimes use antisocial maintenance behaviors. So these are behaviors that maintain the relationship but do not increase relationship satisfaction. And in fact, in some cases, they decrease relationship satisfaction. So these are behaviors that discourage interaction, or they try to change the partner in some way, and they can often be coercive, they can be manipulative, and they can be controlling in some examples. So again, are behaviors that are not used to keep the relationship satisfying, but they're used to achieve some other maintenance reason. So controlling a partner who you think might break up with you, or avoiding conflict with a partner, because you don't want to engage or you don't want to, relinquish any power, right? That would disrupt the power dynamics in the relationship. So the first three we're going to discuss on this slide um, focus on keeping a relationship at a desired level. Um, so we'll start with avoidance, which is evading the other person or evading each other on certain topics or in certain situations. So, for example, maybe you know somebody in your social network has a crush on you and you're not interested in becoming romantically involved with that person. And so you start to distance yourself from them. You decrease your communication, you maybe decrease your disclosure, right? Because we know that disclosure is a vehicle for communicating intimacy and developing a relationship. Um, Maybe you avoid a certain topic with your partner that you know will cause an argument, or you avoid personal disclosure with someone that you only want a casual friendship with. So, avoidance is just sort of like creating distance between you and the other person. No flirting is essentially the same as avoidance, but it's just describing a more specific context, right? So being standoffish if another person flirts with you and you're not interested in that type of relationship or in that type of interaction. And then talking about others, again, is sort of the same thing from the first two, but this would be talking about an existing relationship to show a lack of interest in another person who might be interested in you. Right, so in a romantic context, if you are currently in a romantic relationship but somebody's flirting with you, you may bring up that relationship to communicate to them that you're not interested in pursuing this any further. You could do this with a friendship as well though, right? So if there's somebody in your social circle who seems to be trying to get closer to you and you're like, hey, that role of bestie is already taken, you might bring up your best friend in multiple conversations. So these are ways of, right, keeping the relationship in existence, but more specifically, keeping it at a desired level, one that is not as intimate as perhaps the other person is trying to make it be. These antisocial maintenance behaviors are all designed to alter the partner's feelings or to keep them in a relationship, um, specifically in situations where maybe they should not stay in the relationship. So, jealousy induction is something we talked about when we talked about uncertainty and engaging in secret tests. So, these are behaviors where you're trying to make your partner jealous. So, the idea is that you induce jealousy to spark feelings of love and possessiveness. Um, and you're thinking that this will make your partner want to stay in the relationship, right? So, flirting with someone else in front of your partner, you're trying to send the message or you're trying to get that person to basically think, well, hey, they must be good enough for me if other people want them too, right? So you're trying to make the person jealous in hopes that they'll realize how like special or important you are to them. Spying is seeking information about the partner without their knowledge. So this helps to reduce uncertainty about potential rival relationships and helps you to compete with those rivals. But this involves things like going through emails, text messages, social media, asking other people for information, following the other person, right? Um, so I mean, obviously, I don't think I have to say it, but these are not positive behaviors. These are not good behaviors. This does not show the other person that you trust them. Uh, in terms of like social media use, one thing that we might do is post about our relationship on social media, which is sort of a public display of possession. Um, Engaging in infidelity, whether it's romantic or sexual activity with someone else, is a way of communicating to the other partner, to your partner, that you have other alternatives. Or maybe you do this, you engage in infidelity as a way to seek benefits that you're not receiving from the current relationship. Or in some cases, maybe you're cheating because they cheated on you, and so you're hoping to hurt them, um, and they'll come back to you, right? So kind of that idea of like, well, if I show them I can do this too, then again maybe they'll realize how special and important this relationship is. Allowing control would be focusing exclusively on the partner and relinquishing control maybe over your own decisions and your own autonomy and independence. So this would involve things like ignoring your friends and family so that you can spend time and energy on your partner, or just generally letting the partner make all of the decisions. And then finally, destructive conflict is using conflict um, that involve trying to control the partner. So yelling and starting arguments. This basically allows you an opportunity to tell them what they should be doing and how they can be better. So all of these strategies can lead to, or all these antisocial maintenance behaviors can lead to more problems or the eventual termination of a relationship. Um, Most of them are tied to low satisfaction and can be signs of a toxic relationship, right? So they can create more problems than they solve, and they can be very hurtful. But the idea is basically trying to control the other person in a way that maybe maintains your satisfaction. Um, but in most cases, if you're using them, you're probably not satisfied with the relationship. In more recent years, there's been a question regarding the modality or the channel through which maintenance behaviors occur, right? So, modality just refers to the channel of communication. Are you sending your message verbally? Are you sending it non verbally? Are you sending it through a mediated channel, right? So, through like text message, video, social media, and so on. Um, so people were sort of wondering if there's any difference in the way we maintain our relationships, or through which channels we engage in certain behaviors. And generally speaking, what we've come around to is just that most maintenance behaviors can be employed in both face-to-face and mediated contexts. For example, to use an example from the antisocial maintenance behaviors we just discussed, you can make someone jealous by flirting with another person in person, right? So you can make your partner jealous by flirting with someone while they're watching, or by interacting with somebody on a social media platform, right? So commenting on their posts, liking their photos, exchanging Snapchats or whatever, right? So you can make your partner jealous by engaging basically in the same behavior in both face-to-face and mediated channels. And this underscores some of the principles highlighted by media multiplexity theory. So this is not a theory that you have to worry about for this semester, but it may come up if you take the advanced interpersonal course. So media multiplexity theory basically just says that the closer our relationships are, the more channels we use to communicate, and the more channels we use to maintain them, right? So you are not limiting your interactions just to like face to face and text messaging, but if you are in a highly committed relationship with your romantic partner or with your best friend or with a parent or a sibling, you probably communicate with them through various social media platforms, through text messaging, through phone calls, and through face to face channels, right? So the stronger the connection, the more media or the more channels you use to communicate and therefore maintain the relationship. Where there might be some difference worth exploring is the fact that the same maintenance behavior might be interpreted differently depending on whether it's enacted in a face to face setting or through a mediated channel. And so this underscores the idea of mode segmentation. So, mode segmentation basically says that we have preferences and expectations for where certain types of information are shared. And when those expectations are violated, we may experience negative relational consequences, right? So, you probably select certain channels for certain types of conversation. And in doing so, that indicates their importance in the relationship. So it would be inappropriate, perhaps, to discuss a very serious topic via text messaging because text messaging is not a very intimate way of communicating, right? So the same maintenance behavior, communicating support, for example, or constructive conflict management, um, might be interpreted differently if you're engaging in that behavior through a mediated channel. It might be interpreted more negatively because it's a relatively intimate behavior and we expect people to set some time aside, right, to make an effort, put forth an effort that we kind of associate with face to face communication. So that's kind of what the research has uncovered. It's not necessarily um, that we're engaging in certain behaviors online and certain behaviors offline. It's more about the interpretation of the behavior and the channel through which it occurs. And communication on social media, we do know, also highlights the importance of positivity, right? So we want our friends and our family members and our romantic partners to respond positively and to engage positively with our posts and also to share stories, right, with other people about our relationships with them. So I know, for example, I recently, my best friend had a birthday and I posted some photos on Facebook to wish her a happy birthday and to just basically say, I miss you and I'm sorry we can't see each other as often as we would like, right? And so that's a positive behavior and it helps to maintain our long distance relationship. Speaking of friendships, here we are examining maintenance in our friendships. So, this is the point at the lecture where I am going to discuss different types of relationships and the maintenance behaviors that are specifically important in maintaining those relationships. So, we'll start with friendships where openness, supportiveness, and positivity are most important. Um, but some researchers have uncovered and have argued that there are some subtle differences between men and women in terms of maintaining their friendships with other men and other women, right? So in other words, I'm talking about friendships between two men and friendships between two women. So I'm going to put all this information up here. So women friendships tend to be described as face-to-face friendships, and friendships between men tend to be described as side-by-side relationships, which reflects a difference in what we call closeness in dialogue on the women's side and closeness in doing on the men's side. Um, so everybody, both types of friendships value self-disclosure, but research has shown that women tend to talk more. And both types of friendships value spending time together, but men tend to engage in more focused activities. And so that's where the face to face versus the side by side characterization comes in, right? So interacting, sometimes women will get together just to talk, right? Just to share, just to disclose, just to catch up. Whereas men often will plan activities where they're doing something specific or engaging in a specific type of behavior. With that said, um, like I said before, both all people value both of these activities. These are just some of the differences that have come up in the research. And at this point in my in-person section of this course, I usually ask if students feel that this is still accurate. And I get a variety of responses. Some people say, yeah, this is like pretty characteristic of my experience in my friendships. And then other people say, well, I've had some different experiences and I have different types of friendships and we engage in probably similar levels of dialogue as we do in doing activities with one another. So I would ask you to just think about that and think about whether you think that there are differences in these types of friendships. And of course, we're overlooking a number of other important demographic variables, and we're simplifying these these friendships. So this is a great opportunity for you to maybe put some of that critical feminist theorizing to work, and see if you can, identify any questions or limitations to the argument here. Now, this is another discussion that I often hesitate to include, but it's in your textbook, so we'll talk about it. So, some research has identified friendship challenges between men and women as well. Now, everybody has acknowledged that these friendships can be very rewarding, right? Because it's nice to get the perspective of someone who maybe doesn't share the same speech community that you do, right? So we know that men tend to be socialized into masculine speech communities and women tend to be socialized into feminine speech communities. So it might be nice to get the perspective of a person from a different speech community. But research has also suggested that these friendships can be ambiguous and confusing and at times just plain weird. And there are three challenges that are important for maintaining these types of friendships. And the first one is called the emotional bond challenge. And this reflects the idea that we are socialized to see one another as potential romantic partners rather than friends. And so if you're socialized to assume that all men and all women are potential romantic and sexual partners, you may experience uncertainty then about your feelings toward them in your friendships. So in other words, you feel, really close to the other person and you like them a lot, just not in a romantic way, and that can potentially be confusing. I in working on this lecture every semester, I always have a hard time coming up with examples of single men and women on TV that aren't part of a group and are main characters, um, that are where the friendship is reflected as just a friendship. So one of the examples that comes up is Mulder and Scully from the X Files, but I'm not even sure that that's accurate anymore. Um, some students have suggested looking at New Girl. So if you can come up with examples where there are single men and single women featured on a television program, um, that are main characters, where it's they're only friends, the relationship is purely platonic, please send those my way. But I do think that the fact that I am having such a hard time finding these characters on TV and in movies and in other forms of media underscores the fact that this is not a relationship that's represented because of this cultural assumption, that we're supposed to be attracted to one another all the time. Anyway, moving on to the second challenge, it's the sexual challenge. So, coping with potential sexual attraction can be part of a friendship between men and women. So, there's a famous scene from When Harry Met Sally where Harry basically says that men and women can never be friends because the sex thing always gets in the way. So, that's my question to you. Do you think the sex thing always gets in the way? So many of us have probably experienced sexual attraction toward a friend, and having sex with a friend is actually not that uncommon, but we might experience uncertainty after having that sexual encounter. So that's potentially a challenge experienced, in friendships between men and women. And then the public presentation challenge is essentially when you're so close that other people assume that there's something romantic or sexual going on. And in this case, friends might be very careful about how they present themselves to others. They may be asked to explain the nature of their relationship to others. Romantic partners can become suspicious of the closeness of the relationship and potentially jealous, right? So the public presentation challenge is something else, that is difficult to navigate in these types of friendships. These challenges are also applicable to some friendships in which one or both members, are identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual, right? So certainly not limited to uh, people who identify as heterosexual. So the variable that we are focusing on here in these friendships between men and women is the romantic intent variable, right? So whether or not there's a desire to move the friendship to a more romantic relationship. And there are four types of relationships that reflect this romantic intent variable, or different levels of the romantic intent variable. And your maintenance behaviors depend on those romantic intentions. So people who have high romantic intentions are going to utilize more pro-social maintenance behaviors. So this is the two groups in the middle of this list here, the mutual romance group and the desires romance group, right? So the mutual romance group, these are situations where both friends want the friendship to become romantic. And so they're going to use the most maintenance behaviors, which helps to shift the relationship from friends to partners. The desires romance folks are people who where you want the relationship to become romantic, but your friend does not. Um, so these are also characterized by high levels of pro-social maintenance, but there's a lot of avoidance in terms of talking about the relationship. And this is because you, as the person who desires the romance, maybe you fear rejection or you fear that your disclosure will jeopardize the relationship. People with or friends who exhibit low romantic intentions are the strictly platonic people and the rejects romance people. So the strictly platonic people, this is where neither person in the friendship wants the friendship to become romantic. And then rejects romance would be when you want the friendship to remain platonic, but your friend is the one who wants to introduce romance. So in both of these situations, you're likely to engage in less joint activity, less like flirtation with that specific person, and you're more likely to talk more about your other relationships, right? To basically show that you're not interested in this relationship becoming any closer, any more intimate than it already is. Um, most of the people who are in platonic relationships define the relationship as strictly platonic, and there are at least 6 reasons why they want to keep it that way. The first and the most common is protecting the relationship, right? So you worry that you could jeopardize the relationship if you decide to date one another and then you end up breaking up. So these relationships are characterized by high levels of openness, positivity, joint activities, and supportiveness. People also report just a lack of attraction to the other person. This is the second most common reason for keeping the relationship platonic. And so you're specifically likely to avoid flirting with the other person. Disapproval from others is an important reason. This is the third most common reason. So, in other words, people in your social network might become upset if the two of you start dating because it'll mess up existing social dynamics, right? And there's a kind of a common saying that this is why people in bands, people in musical groups should not date or should not be in a romantic relationship, because then if they break up, then the band is likely to break up as well. So avoidance is a common maintenance behavior here. Also, we, keep our relationships platonic because one or both people are in an existing romantic relationship with someone else, or one or both people is attracted to or interested in someone else. Uncertainty is certainly another example. So you might be unsure about the partner's reaction. You might worry about getting hurt, rejected, disappointed, so on and so forth. And then finally, sometimes one or both people are just not interested in any kind of romantic relationship at all. And so that would include the current friendship. Um, these reasons can all overlap, right? So you could be in an existing relationship, but also worry about disapproval from others. And that's sort of like a double whammy, right? You're in an existing relationship and all your friends are aware of that relationship. So if you were to pursue another relationship, you would certainly experience disapproval from that social network, if two or all three of you belong to that same social network. Friends with benefits relationships are an important type of relationship to discuss because between half and 2/3 of all college students have been or are currently involved in at least one friends with benefits relationship. So these are friends who have sex but do not become a romantic partner. So the benefits part is that you get to have sex with a trusted partner, but without committing to them, right? So the sex plus the no commitment, this is the benefit. The disadvantage, however, is that you might develop unreciprocated romantic feelings, and that can lead to one person feeling jealous and hurt, and it can harm the friendship. So the research, once again, suggests that women are more likely to emphasize the friends part of a friends with benefits relationship and focus on emotion. Um, and men are more likely to emphasize the benefits part of the friends with benefits relationship and focus on sex. Um, Again, if we were in a face-to-face course, we would have a conversation about this. This statistic here is from 2007. So I think that the real difference might be that women are less likely to talk openly about sex out of fear of being judged by others, right? So we know that there's a sexual double standard in our culture, and so women are just sort of not supposed to be sexual beings, or it's less accepted that they kind of express sexuality compared to men. So this might be true. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying that perhaps the real difference is just that women are going to be less likely to talk about their sexual feelings and their desire for sex because other people will judge them or criticize them. All right. There are different types of friends with benefits relationships according to a study conducted in 2013. So this graph reflects the percentage of college students who described their most recent friends with benefits relationship. So 26% described their relationship as true friends. So these are close friends who have just added sex to the relationship. They're not a couple, but they care about each other as friends. 15% described their relationship as being network opportunism. So, in other words, they were both in the same social network. They're not super close to one another, but they serve as each other's sexual backup if no one else is available, right? So you're feeling, you know, uh, social, you're feeling active one evening. You can't find anybody else to hook up with, so you call your kind of trusted partner. Um, and if they're available, then you make it work. 13% described their relationship as just sex. So the interaction between them revolves almost solely around planning and having sex. So, in other words, there's no real emotional connection here. 11% are described as X sex, or what we call transition out. So, this is where you have a former romantic partner, but you have sex with them after you've broken up. 9% describe their relationship as intentional transition in. So you start out in a friends with benefits relationship with the intention of becoming romantic partners if that works out. And then you successfully make that transition to romantic partners. 8% identified as unintentional transition in. So you intend to keep the friends with benefits relationship as is, but you end up becoming a couple. 7% belong in the failed transition group. So you enter into the friends with benefits relationship with the intention of becoming a couple, but you don't move beyond that. And then 11% are in the other category because they didn't fit cleanly into one category. So, like on again, off again relationships, or relationships that started as X sex and then transitioned back into being a romantic couple. So, around 1/3 of the people in this study um, are people who either had, intend to have, or end up in a romantic relationship. And of those who intended to move to a romantic relationship, only about half of them succeeded. So this is just one study, and you can take these findings as you wish. But if you do have any thoughts or questions, please definitely let me know, because this is always a sort of an interesting conversation for an in-person discussion. So there is a lot of uncertainty in friends with benefits relationships, um, but we problematically don't always talk about that uncertainty. And so maintaining friends with benefits relationships can be very challenging. So one of the things that people do in those relationships is they establish rules so that no one gets hurt, right? So just for example, some of the questions that we experience would be, how should we label our relationship, or should we label our relationship? How will the relationship change in the future? How do we feel about each other now that we're having sex? Can we stay friends? How do we maintain this relationship, right? And so again, we just don't talk about those things. 76% in one particular study did not discuss these issues, and 66% did not negotiate any ground rules. But when people in friends with benefits relationships do talk, it's usually to establish these rules to maintain the relationship in a way that no one gets hurt. So these are some of the rules that come up. The most common is staying emotionally detached, right? So don't get jealous, and don't fall in love with one another. So this was reflected in the communication of the people who, on that graph from the previous slide, identified as true friends, or just sex, or network opportunism. Another common rule is revolves around negotiations about sexual activity, right? So agreeing to use condoms, for example, or are there any expectations of regularity in this dynamic? They set up rules regarding communication, so maybe rules about calling one another or being open about other relationships. Secrecy. So do we tell people about our friends with benefits relationship, or is this something that we want to, maintain privacy about? Rules regarding the permanence of the relationship. So typically there's a discussion about or an agreement that this is just a temporary setup. And then rules regarding friendship. So oftentimes there's a conversation about making sure that both parties prioritize friendship over the sex. So, friends with benefits relationships tend to be easier to maintain when the broader social network is accepting of the relationship. But again, many people just don't talk about it. And so there's not a lot of openness regarding these types of relationships, although they are quite common. These are one of the most difficult relationships to maintain. They can end completely, they can return to friends only, or they can turn into a romantic relationship. In my, experiences with people that I've known to engage in friends with benefits relationships, I would say most of them have ended completely, although, and almost none of them have been able to return to friends only. And then there are a few of them that have turned into a romantic relationship. So that's just anecdotally my experience in watching my friends go through these types of relationships. And then finally, let's talk for a few minutes about maintaining long distance relationships. And this could reflect a romantic relationship, or a friendship, or a family relationship. So, the number of romantic partners in long distance relationships is increasing, right? Because more people are going to college or pursuing graduate school. More people are pursuing professional careers. There are generally more opportunities for traveling and for studying abroad, right? For college students. Um, And so, but with that being said, many long distance couples are just as satisfied as um, couples who are in close, geographically close relationships. And the same is true among friendships, right? So again, we're not talking specifically about romantic relationships. The primary challenge in these relationships is the lack of face to face communication, in addition to a lack of nonverbal affection and the ability to share activities and tasks and engage in routine talk. So, people in long distance relationships use fewer maintenance strategies compared to people in proximal relationships, but they still manage to maintain happy relationships. And in some cases, even happier relationships compared to couples or friends who are in geographically close relationships. And the possible explanation for this is idealization. So, this is why some long distance relationships stay satisfying. So, this involves things like describing the partner and the relationship in overly positive terms. Um, the downside of that is that in doing so, you're sometimes reflecting unrealistic expectations, right? But this keeps people committed to their relationships. Dating partners, research has shown, who idealize are more likely to believe that they'll get married in the future. And another thing to consider is that many of these relationships had already established closeness before separating, right? Um, another aspect of idealization is that we tend to imagine how great our lives would be if we could just be together all the time, and that makes idealization much more likely. One of the ways in which people in long distance relationships maintain that relationship is through mediated communication. It's basically a necessity, right? But it may lead to skewed perceptions of the partner's communication style, positively skewed perceptions of the partner's communication style, right? So with mediated communication, you have a lot of control, right? You can think about and revise exactly what you want to say or how you present yourself. So if you're sending a text message or um, a message on a different like social media platform, right? You can think about your words, you can craft that message, you can edit that message. Even if you're sending a video of yourself or a photo of yourself, right? You have the ability to take a number of videos or a number of photos before you decide on the one that you like the best. So this is particularly true. The amount of control you have is particularly true with asynchronous forms of mediated communication. Additionally, you don't have to answer immediately. So if you're not feeling up to chatting right now with the other person, you don't have to answer that phone call or that text message or that video message as soon as you receive it. So mediated communication is necessary, but it also can lead to again more positive perceptions or positively skewed perceptions that again are going to underscore those unrealistic expectations. um, so one of a couple of other characteristics of these relationships is that people are often um, on their best behavior when they're in a long distance relationship, right? So when they do have the opportunity to see each other in person, they plan their activities more carefully and strategically, right? They work harder to treat each other in a fair manner. They have longer and more in depth discussions. They make reservations, they clear their work schedules, right? Clear their social schedules because you want to have that quality alone time. And as I said before, just present themselves more favorably, right? And so they tend to perceive their communication as being more restricted, but of higher quality. Now, idealization, all these overly positive perceptions of the other person can become a problem when the long distance relationship becomes geographically close or more proximal, because maybe you've been avoiding difficult conversations because of that distance, right? And it's much easier to do so when you are physically separate from one another. So you've been avoiding these difficult conversations because you don't want to, put a damper on the good mood. You're engaging in all this idealization, and you don't want to bring that down. But now, if the partners move closer to one another, those difficult conversations are going to be had, and this can lead to conflict. Also, all that, best behavior, that's not happening anymore because you're no longer able to clear your schedules, your work schedules, your social schedules, right? So you might have to go through a negotiation process of how you're going to spend time together and how you're going to spend quality time together. So it's important that long distance relationship members keep their expectations realistic to avoid disappointment when coming together. So, in other words, maybe avoid too much idealization. Some idealization is great. That's what keeps us invested. That's what keeps us happy. That's what keeps us hopeful. But if you are idealizing the partner in the relationship too much to the point where you're avoiding any conflict or any negativity, that can become a problem later on, if and when you have the chance to move closer together. So that is the end of this presentation. It's a lengthy one, I know. So if you have any questions or any clarification, please, as always, feel free to let me know.